I still remember the exact moment my career changed forever. It wasn't during a celebration or a promotion. It was during a routine staff meeting on a Tuesday morning, when my boss looked directly at me and said the words that would ultimately lead to his downfall: "You're replaceable." My name is Marcus Chen and I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I worked as a senior analyst at Davidson Technologies, a mid-sized software consulting firm in Seattle. The company specialized in helping businesses transition their legacy systems to modern cloud-based solutions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important and I was good at it. Really good. But let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand how I got to that meeting in the first place. I joined Davidson Technologies right out of graduate school. I had a master's degree in computer science with a focus on data systems, and I was eager to prove myself in the real world. The company had about 200 employees back then, and it felt like a place where hard work could really make a difference. My first manager, Susan Martinez, was incredible. She mentored me, challenged me, and helped me grow from a nervous newcomer into a confident professional. Under Susan's leadership, I thrived. I worked on increasingly complex projects, often staying late to make sure every detail was perfect. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I genuinely loved solving problems, finding elegant solutions to messy situations. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice and was leading my own small team of analysts. Then Susan got promoted to regional director and everything changed. Enter Richard Blackwood. Richard was brought in from outside the company to take over Susan's position as department head. He was in his late 40s, always wore expensive suits, and had this way of talking that made everything sound like he was doing you a favor just by breathing the same air. From day one, it was clear that Richard and I were not going to see eye to eye. Richard believed in what he called traditional hierarchy. To him, management was about maintaining control, not collaboration. He didn't want input from his team. He wanted obedience. He would make decisions without consulting the people who actually did the work, then blame us when those decisions led to problems. I tried to adapt. I really did. But there were times when I couldn't stay silent, especially when I saw us heading toward disaster on a project. Richard hated that. He saw my input as insubordination, as a challenge to his authority. The tension between us grew with each passing month. Despite our rocky relationship, I continued to excel at my job. My team consistently delivered results. We had the highest client satisfaction scores in the department. We met our deadlines. We stayed under budget. The numbers didn't lie, and I thought that would be enough to prove my value. I was wrong. The staff meeting where everything came to a head was supposed to be a routine quarterly review. About 20 of us gathered in the main conference room that Tuesday morning. Richard stood at the front with his PowerPoint presentation, clicking through slides about department performance, upcoming projects, and strategic initiatives. Then he got to a slide titled Accountability and Excellence. This is where things took a dark turn. "I want to talk about something important," Richard began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when he was about to make a point. "There's been a concerning trend in this department. Some people seem to think that past performance entitles them to special treatment. Some people think they can question every decision, push back on every directive, and generally act like they know better than management." My stomach tightened. I knew exactly where this was going. "Let me be crystal clear about something," he continued, his eyes scanning the room before landing squarely on me. "Nobody in this room is indispensable. Every single one of you, no matter how long you've been here or what you've accomplished, is replaceable. If you can't align with the vision and leadership of this department, there are plenty of talented people out there who can." The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Several of my colleagues glanced at me sympathetically, but no one said a word. Richard held my gaze for a moment longer, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth, before moving on to the next slide. I sat there, my face burning, my hands clenched under the table. I had been publicly humiliated, and everyone knew it was directed at me. When the meeting finally ended, I walked straight back to my desk, trying to maintain my composure. My teammate Jennifer stopped by my cubicle an hour later. "Marcus, that was completely out of line," she whispered. "Everyone knows he was talking about you. It was unprofessional and uncalled for." "It's fine," I said, even though it wasn't fine at all. "I just need to focus on my work." But I couldn't focus. Richard's words kept echoing in my head. "You're replaceable." The worst part wasn't just the insult. It was the realization that in Richard's eyes, none of my contributions mattered. All those late nights, all those successful projects, all those satisfied clients meant nothing to him because I had dared to speak up. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I updated my resume. I wasn't sure if I was actually going to leave, but I needed to feel like I had options. As I typed out my accomplishments and responsibilities, I realized just how much I had achieved at Davidson Technologies. I had led 15 major client projects. I had trained and mentored 8 junior analysts. I had developed a new workflow process that increased our team's efficiency by 30%. I had created documentation systems that were now used company-wide. I was proud of what I had built. And I wasn't going to let Richard Blackwood make me forget that. The next few weeks were tense. Richard seemed emboldened by his public display of dominance. He became even more controlling, even more dismissive of any input from the team. He made unilateral decisions about project assignments, often putting less experienced analysts on complex tasks while assigning me to routine work that was below my skill level. It was clear he was trying to push me out. But something interesting started happening. The cracks in Richard's leadership began to show. One of his pet projects, a cloud migration for a major retail client, was falling behind schedule. Richard had insisted on using a particular approach that several of us, including me, had warned against. He ignored our concerns and forged ahead. Now the project was 3 weeks overdue, and the client was threatening to terminate the contract. Richard called an emergency meeting. He looked stressed, his usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. "We need to fix this situation immediately," he announced. "Marcus, I'm assigning you to take over this project. I need you to turn it around." I looked at him calmly. "The approach you've chosen won't work for this client's infrastructure. We recommended an alternative path 6 weeks ago. If we continue on the current trajectory, we're going to fail." "Then change the trajectory," he snapped. "That's why I'm putting you on it. Just make it work." "I can make it work," I said evenly, "but it will require scrapping most of what's been done and starting over with the approach we originally suggested. That will take time and resources." Richard's jaw tightened. He hated being proven wrong, but he was desperate. "Fine. Do what you need to do. Just save this account." I took over the failing project along with my team. We worked around the clock for 3 weeks, implementing the solution we had recommended from the start. It wasn't easy. We had to rebuild significant portions of the work that had already been done. But we knew what we were doing and we were motivated. Not just to save the account but to prove a point. We delivered the project 2 days ahead of the revised deadline. The client was thrilled. They sent a formal letter to Davidson Technologies praising the turnaround and specifically mentioning my team's expertise and professionalism. They even increased their contract, signing on for 2 additional projects. Richard took full credit, of course. In his report to upper management, he framed it as his decisive leadership that saved the day. He barely mentioned my team's role. When I confronted him about it privately, he just shrugged. "Welcome to the real world, Marcus," he said dismissively. "Management gets the credit. That's how it works." But here's what Richard didn't know. The client's letter hadn't just gone to our department. It had also been sent directly to our CEO, Patricia Caldwell, and she had actually read it. She noticed that the letter specifically praised individuals who weren't mentioned at all in Richard's report. I didn't know this at the time. I was too busy dealing with my growing frustration. The rescue of that major project should have been a turning point, but nothing changed. If anything, Richard became more hostile toward me. He saw my success as a threat. Then came the Henderson Industries proposal. This was a huge opportunity for Davidson Technologies. Henderson was a manufacturing conglomerate looking to completely overhaul their IT infrastructure. The contract was worth over $3 million and could lead to ongoing work for years. Every department was putting together proposals, and Richard was determined that our team would win the bid. He assigned himself as the lead on the proposal, which was unusual. Normally, department heads didn't work directly on client proposals. They delegated to their senior staff. But Richard wanted the glory of landing this massive account. He spent 2 weeks working on the proposal, keeping it mostly to himself. When he finally shared it with the team for feedback, my heart sank. The proposal was generic, filled with buzzwords and vague promises but lacking any real substance. It completely missed what Henderson Industries actually needed. I had done my homework on Henderson. I had read their annual reports, studied their business model, even reached out to a former colleague who had worked there. I knew their pain points, their challenges, their goals. Richard's proposal addressed none of them. I debated whether to say anything. After the "You're Replaceable" incident, I knew Richard wouldn't take kindly to criticism. But this was too important. If we submitted this proposal, we would lose the bid, and worse, we would look incompetent. I requested a private meeting with Richard. In his office, I carefully explained my concerns about the proposal. I had prepared a detailed analysis showing where it fell short and what we needed to add to make it competitive. Richard listened with increasing irritation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and laughed coldly. "You just can't help yourself, can you, Marcus?" he said. "You always think you know better. This proposal is exactly what Henderson needs. It showcases our strengths and our vision. But you wouldn't understand that because you're too focused on the weeds, on the technical details. You don't see the big picture. Richard, with respect, I've researched this company extensively. The technical details are exactly what they care about. They've been burned by consultants who made big promises and didn't deliver. They need specifics. And I need team members who support their leadership instead of undermining it," he shot back. "This discussion is over. The proposal goes out as written. If you can't get on board with that, maybe you need to think about whether this is the right place for you." There was again the threat. The implication that I was the problem. I went back to my desk feeling defeated. But I couldn't let it go. That night, on my own time, I drafted an alternative proposal. I spent hours on it, making sure every claim was backed up with specific solutions. Every promise was tied to concrete deliverables. I outlined a phased approach that would minimize risk for Henderson while delivering measurable results. I created detailed technical specifications that demonstrated our team's deep understanding of their needs. I didn't plan to submit it. I just needed to work through my ideas, to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy for thinking Richard's approach was wrong. The next morning, Jennifer came by my desk. She looked worried. "Marcus, I heard Richard talking to HR yesterday. I think he's building a case to let you go." My blood ran cold. "What did you hear?" "He was talking about attitude problems and failure to align with department goals. He's documenting everything. Every time you speak up, every time you offer a different perspective, he's writing it down as insubordination." I thanked Jennifer for the warning. The situation was worse than I thought. Richard wasn't just making my life difficult. He was actively working to get me fired. That afternoon, I received an unexpected email. It was from Patricia Caldwell, the CEO, requesting a meeting with me the following morning. My stomach dropped. This was it. Richard had gone to the top and I was about to be terminated. I barely slept that night. I kept rehearsing what I would say, how I would defend myself. I thought about my family, my mortgage, my career. 6 years at this company and it was about to end because I had a boss who saw competence as a threat. The next morning, I walked into Patricia Caldwell's office expecting the worst. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had founded Davidson Technologies 25 years ago and had built it from a 3-person operation into a thriving company. "Marcus, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit down." I sat, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "I wanted to talk to you about several things," she continued. "First, I want you to know that I read the letter from our retail client, the one praising the work on the cloud migration project. I was impressed, not just by the results, but by the fact that your team turned around what was clearly a failing situation." "Thank you," I managed to say. "I also wanted to talk to you about the Henderson Industries proposal. I understand there was some disagreement about the approach." My heart raced. How did she know about that? Richard must have complained about my pushback. "I offered some suggestions for the proposal," I said carefully. "I had done research on Henderson's specific needs, and I thought there were ways we could strengthen our pitch. But Richard felt his approach was better." Patricia nodded slowly. "I've reviewed Richard's proposal. I've also been made aware that you drafted an alternative version on your own time. I'd like to see it." I was stunned. How did she know about my alternative proposal? I had saved it on my personal laptop, not on company servers. Seeing my confusion, Patricia smiled slightly. "Jennifer came to see me. She was concerned about the direction of your department and thought I should know what was really going on. She mentioned that you had put together what she believed was a superior proposal." Jennifer had gone to the CEO. I didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. "I have it here," I said, pulling out my laptop. "But I want to be clear. I wasn't trying to go around Richard or undermine him. I just needed to work through the ideas." "I understand," Patricia said. "May I see it?" I pulled up the document and handed her my laptop. She read through it carefully, taking her time. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, she looked up. "This is exactly what Henderson needs," she said. "This shows deep understanding of their business, specific solutions to their problems, and a realistic implementation plan. This is the quality of work I expect from Davidson Technologies." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you. I've been hearing concerning reports about the culture in your department. I've been paying closer attention and I don't like what I'm seeing. Richard's leadership style is creating problems. Good people are unhappy. Projects are running into unnecessary difficulties. And talented employees like you are being marginalized instead of empowered. I didn't know what to say. This was not the conversation I had expected. I'm going to make some changes, Patricia continued. First, we're going to submit your proposal for Henderson with you as the lead. Second, I want you to prepare for a larger role. I can't discuss specifics yet, but I want you to know that your work has not gone unnoticed, regardless of what Richard may have told you. I left that meeting in a daze. Everything I thought I knew about the situation had been turned upside down. The CEO had my back. My proposal was being submitted, and there were hints of bigger changes coming. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. Our proposal was submitted to Henderson Industries, and we were selected as one of 3 finalists. We were invited to give a presentation to their executive team. Richard insisted on being part of the presentation team, but Patricia made it clear that I would be the primary presenter since it was my proposal. The presentation went brilliantly. I knew the material inside and out and I could answer every question they threw at me. More importantly, I could speak to Henderson's specific needs because I had done the research. Richard stood to the side, trying to look important but contributing very little. The Henderson executives directed most of their questions to me, and I could see Richard's frustration growing. 3 days later, we got the news. We won the contract. Henderson Industries chose Davidson Technologies, specifically citing the depth of understanding shown in our proposal and our presentation. It was the biggest win our department had ever had. Richard tried to take credit again, sending out a company-wide email congratulating his team for the victory and highlighting his leadership in securing the contract. But this time, Patricia responded with her own email, specifically praising my proposal and presentation, and making it clear who had actually led the effort. That's when I knew Richard's days were numbered. You don't publicly contradict the CEO's narrative unless you're making a point. Patricia was sending a message to everyone in the company. 2 days later, Richard called me into his office. He looked different. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. Marcus, I think we need to clear the air, he began. I know we've had our differences, but you did good work on the Henderson account. I wanted to acknowledge that. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from him, but it felt hollow. He wasn't sorry for how he had treated me. He was scared because he could see the writing on the wall. I appreciate that, Richard, I said neutrally. I think going forward we can work together more effectively, he continued. I value your input and your expertise. I wanted to ask him why it had taken 6 months and the CEO's intervention for him to value my expertise, but I held my tongue. There was no point in antagonizing him further. I'm committed to doing my best work for the company, I said simply. The meeting ended awkwardly and I went back to my desk wondering what would happen next. I didn't have to wonder for long. The following Monday, Patricia called an all-hands meeting for our department. She stood at the front of the conference room with someone I didn't recognize, a serious-looking woman in her 40s. Thank you all for coming, Patricia began. I have an important announcement to make. After careful consideration, we've decided to restructure the leadership of this department. Richard Blackwood will be transitioning to a consulting role with the company, working on special projects. This is effective immediately. The room erupted in whispered conversations. Richard wasn't there. He had already been informed and had apparently chosen not to attend the meeting. Patricia continued. I want to introduce you to Carmen Rodriguez, who will be serving as interim department head while we conduct a search for a permanent replacement. Carmen comes to us from our Chicago office, where she led a team of 50 consultants. She brings a collaborative leadership style that I believe will serve this department well. Carmen said a few words about her background and her approach to leadership. She emphasized teamwork, open communication, and empowering people to do their best work. It was everything Richard wasn't. After the meeting, Patricia asked me to stay behind. Carmen stayed as well. Marcus, I want to make you an offer, Patricia said once the room had cleared. I'd like you to serve as acting senior manager for this department while we search for Richard's permanent replacement. You would be Carmen's second in command and would oversee all major client projects. I was speechless. This was a significant promotion, one that would put me on the leadership track I had been hoping for since I joined the company. Before you answer, Carmen interjected, I want you to know that I specifically requested you for this role. I reviewed the work you did on the Henderson proposal and the retail client turnaround. I also spoke with several members of your team. You have the respect of your colleagues and the skills to lead. I'd be honored to work with you. I would be honored to accept, I said, finding my voice. Thank you for this opportunity. As I walked out of that conference room, I thought about the staff meeting 2 months earlier, when Richard had looked at me and said I was replaceable. He had meant it as an insult, as a way to put me in my place. But in the end, he was the one who got replaced. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I stepped into my new role and immediately began working on improving the department's processes. I implemented the feedback systems that Richard had always dismissed. I set up regular one-on-one meetings with team members to understand their challenges and aspirations. I created clearer project guidelines and made sure everyone understood how their work contributed to the company's success. Working with Carmen was a revelation. She was everything a leader should be: confident but humble, decisive but open to input, demanding but supportive. She trusted her team to do their jobs and gave us the autonomy to do them well. Under her leadership, the department's morale improved dramatically almost overnight. The Henderson project kicked off successfully. I led the implementation team, and we delivered the first phase ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was so impressed that they fast-tracked approval for phase 2 and began talking about expanding the scope even further. Jennifer came by my office one afternoon with a smile on her face. You know, when Richard said you were replaceable, I don't think this is what he had in mind. I laughed. Yeah, probably not. He underestimated you, she said more seriously. A lot of people might have quit or just kept their heads down after that meeting. But you kept pushing, kept doing excellent work even when it wasn't appreciated. That took real integrity. I just couldn't let him be right about me, I admitted. I knew my value even if he didn't see it. 3 months after Richard's departure, Patricia made another announcement. Carmen would be staying on permanently as department head, and I would be promoted to senior manager with a salary increase and expanded responsibilities. It was official. I had not only survived Richard's attempt to push me out, but I had thrived in his absence. I never saw Richard again after he left. I heard through the grapevine that his consulting role lasted about 6 weeks before he quietly resigned from the company altogether. Last I heard, he had taken a position with a smaller firm in another state. I wished him well. Despite everything, I didn't take pleasure in his failure. I just wished he had learned to value his team instead of viewing us as threats to his ego. Looking back on that whole experience, I learned some valuable lessons. First, your worth is not determined by how one person perceives you, especially if that person is more concerned with maintaining control than achieving results. Second, excellence speaks for itself. You don't have to shout about your accomplishments or play political games. Just do consistently great work and eventually the right people will notice. Third, organizations are bigger than any one person's dysfunction. Even when it feels like you're trapped in an impossible situation, there are usually people at higher levels who care about doing the right thing. But perhaps the most important lesson was about replaceable. The truth is, we are all replaceable in a literal sense. No one is so important that the organization can't function without them. But there's a big difference between being replaceable and being easily replaced. It takes time and effort to build the kind of expertise, relationships, and track record that I had developed at Davidson Technologies. Richard thought he could dismiss me with a few words in a meeting, but he failed to understand that replacing someone who is truly good at their job comes at a cost. My story didn't end with Richard's departure. If anything, that was just the beginning of a new chapter. Over the next year, I continued to grow in my role. I led our expansion into new service areas. I mentored junior team members who reminded me of myself when I first started. I worked on projects that challenged me and allowed me to make a real impact on our clients' businesses. The Henderson Industries contract turned into a multi-year relationship. They became one of our flagship clients, and we helped them transform their entire IT infrastructure. The success of that project led to referrals to other companies in their industry. Our department's revenue grew by 40% in the year following Richard's departure. Carmen and I developed a strong working relationship. She taught me about the strategic aspects of leadership that I had never been exposed to under Richard's style of management. She showed me how to balance competing priorities, how to navigate office politics without compromising your integrity, and how to build a team culture where people feel valued and motivated. I also worked on myself. I realized that some of my conflicts with Richard had stemmed not just from his poor leadership, but from my own difficulty accepting that not everyone would appreciate my input. I learned to pick my battles more carefully, to present my ideas in ways that didn't trigger defensive reactions, and to understand that sometimes the best way to influence a situation is to demonstrate value through action rather than argument. One afternoon, almost a year after that fateful staff meeting, Patricia stopped by my office. We had developed a good working relationship, and she occasionally checked in to see how things were going. "Marcus, I've been thinking about something," she said, settling into one of my chairs. "Do you remember when you first came to see me about the Henderson proposal?" "Of course," I said. "That meeting changed everything for me." "You looked terrified," she said with a slight smile. "You thought I was going to fire you." "I absolutely did," I admitted. "I thought Richard had convinced you I was a problem employee." "Here's what you didn't know," Patricia said. "I had been watching your department for months before that. I had seen the pattern of Richard taking credit for successful projects and blaming his team for failures. I had noticed that your team's morale was declining under his leadership. I had reviewed the data showing that projects ran more smoothly when he was less involved. "Why didn't you intervene sooner?" I asked. "Because I needed to be sure," she said. "Replacing a department head is a big decision, one that affects a lot of people. I needed to see concrete evidence that the problem was his leadership, not just normal workplace friction. When Jennifer came to me with her concerns and mentioned your alternative proposal, that gave me the opportunity one needed to evaluate the situation directly." "So Jennifer really went out on a limb for me," I said. "She did," Patricia confirmed. "She was risking her own position by going around Richard to reach me. That told me something important about the culture he had created. People felt they couldn't raise concerns through normal channels." She paused, then continued. "The truth is, Marcus, we nearly lost you. If I had waited another month to intervene, you probably would have found another job and left. We would have lost one of our most talented people because of one person's ego and insecurity. That's exactly what I'm trying to prevent from happening again." I thought about how close I had come to leaving. My resume had been updated. I had started browsing job listings. If things had continued on their trajectory, I would have eventually reached my breaking point. "I'm glad you stepped in when you did," I said sincerely. "Me too," Patricia replied. "And I want you to know that I see a bright future for you here. You have the technical skills, the leadership potential, and most importantly, the integrity that this company needs as we continue to grow." That conversation stayed with me. It reminded me that even in our darkest professional moments, we might not see the full picture of what's happening behind the scenes. People in positions of power often know more than they let on, and justice, while sometimes slow, does eventually prevail in healthy organizations. As I write this, it's been 2 years since Richard told me I was replaceable. I'm now the youngest department head in company history, having taken over when Carmen was promoted to Vice President of Operations. I lead a team of 35 people, and we're consistently rated as one of the top-performing departments in the company. We've won industry awards for our work. We've been featured in case studies. We've helped our clients achieve remarkable results. But more than any of that, I'm proud of the culture we've built. People feel safe to speak up. New ideas are encouraged, not punished. Mistakes are treated as learning opportunities, not ammunition for blame. We celebrate each other's successes genuinely, without the toxic competition that Richard fostered. When someone on my team does exceptional work, I make sure they get the recognition they deserve. I often think about what I would say if I could talk to my past self, sitting in that staff meeting, burning with humiliation as Richard declared me replaceable. I would tell him to hold on, to keep doing excellent work, to trust that his value would eventually be recognized. I would tell him that Richard's opinion was not the final word on his worth. I would tell him that the storm would pass and something better waited on the other side. I would also tell him that Richard wasn't entirely wrong. We are all replaceable in the sense that no position belongs to anyone forever. But being replaceable doesn't mean being disposable. It doesn't mean your contributions don't matter. It doesn't mean you should accept being treated poorly or having your work dismissed. The real question is not whether you're replaceable, but what value you bring while you're in your role. Do you make your organization better? Do you help your team succeed? Do you solve problems that others can't? Do you conduct yourself with integrity even when no one is watching? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you're not easily replaced, even if technically someone else could eventually fill your chair. Organizations that understand this succeed. Those that don't, well, they lose their best people and wonder why they can't compete. Richard learned this lesson the hard way. He thought declaring people replaceable would keep them in line, would remind them of their place in the hierarchy. Instead, he revealed his own insecurity and his failure to understand what really drives excellence in organizations. He created an environment where talented people wanted to leave and where mediocrity was allowed to flourish because challenging ideas threatened his ego. In the end, he was right about one thing: people are replaceable. But what he failed to grasp is that replacement is a two-way street. If you create an environment where good people are treated as disposable, where loyalty and excellence are met with contempt, then you shouldn't be surprised when the organization decides to replace you. Today, when I'm interviewing candidates for my team or mentoring junior employees, I think about the lessons from that difficult period. I make sure people know they're valued. I create space for them to contribute ideas and push back when they disagree. I give credit where it's due. I build people up instead of tearing them down. And when someone joins my team, I make them a promise. As long as they do good work, conduct themselves with integrity, and treat their colleagues with respect, they'll have my full support. They might be technically replaceable in the organizational chart, but they'll be genuinely valued as long as they're here. That's the kind of leader I wish Richard had been. It's the kind of leader I'm determined to be. Sometimes I wonder if Richard ever reflects on what happened, if he ever recognizes that his downfall was entirely self-inflicted. Did he learn anything from the experience, or does he still blame others for his failure? Does he tell himself a different story, one where he's the victim rather than the architect of his own undoing? I'll probably never know, and honestly it doesn't matter. His story ended and mine continued. That staff meeting where he declared me replaceable was meant to diminish me, to put me in my place. Instead, it became the catalyst for positive change, not just for me but for our entire department and the people who came after. The office where I once sat, burning with humiliation, is 2 floors below my current office. Sometimes when I'm walking through the building, I pass that conference room where the infamous meeting took place. I don't feel anger when I see it. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the experience that taught me resilience. Gratitude for the colleagues like Jennifer who stood by me. Gratitude for leaders like Patricia and Carmen who recognized value when they saw it. Gratitude for the opportunity to prove that being called replaceable doesn't make it true. My career isn't defined by that one terrible moment. It's defined by how I responded to it, by the work I continued to do when no one seemed to appreciate it, by the integrity I maintained when it would have been easier to become bitter and cynical. I'm not replaceable in the sense that Richard meant. None of us are. We're all unique individuals with our own combination of skills, experiences, perspectives, and values. Some organizations recognize this and build cultures that celebrate individual contributions. Others try to treat people as interchangeable parts and wonder why they can't retain top talent. I chose to stay and fight for my place at Davidson Technologies, and I'm glad I did. But I also learned an important lesson. If I had left, that would have been okay too. Sometimes the right response to being told you're replaceable is to go find an organization that sees your value. There's no shame in leaving a toxic situation. Not every story has to end with the underdog triumphing in the same place where they were mistreated. But mine did, and I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the opportunity to build something better, to show that leadership doesn't have to be about control and ego. I'm grateful for the chance to help other people avoid the kind of experience I went through. And on the rare occasions when someone asks me about Richard, about the boss who called me replaceable only to be replaced himself 2 months later, I tell them the truth. He taught me valuable lessons about the kind of leader I never want to become. For that, strange as it sounds, I'm almost thankful. Because in the end, we're all teachers. Some teach by example, showing us the path to follow. Others teach by cautionary tale, showing us the path to avoid. Richard was the latter, and while I wouldn't want to repeat that experience, I wouldn't trade the wisdom it gave me. A Marcus Chin. I was told I was replaceable. And I responded by becoming irreplaceable, not through ego or politics, but through consistent excellence, unwavering integrity, and a genuine commitment to making my organization better. That's a lesson Richard never learned, and it's why I'm sitting in his former office today, leading a thriving team while he's just a cautionary tale we occasionally reference in leadership training. The world is full of Richards, bosses who lead through fear and control, who see talented people as threats rather than assets. If you find yourself working for one, remember this story. Remember that their assessment of you is not the final word. Remember that excellence, persistence, and integrity have a way of winning out in the end, even when it feels like you're fighting a losing battle. You might be replaceable in theory. But in practice, in reality, in the eyes of people who matter, you're so much more than that. You're valuable. You're capable. You're worth fighting for. And sometimes, the boss who tells you you're replaceable is really just projecting his own deepest fear onto you. Because deep down, he knows the truth that eventually became obvious to everyone else. He's the one who can be replaced. And when an organization finally realizes they can do better, they will. That's what happened to Richard. That's what happens to every leader who mistakes intimidation for inspiration, who confuses compliance with commitment, who thinks declaring people replaceable will somehow make them more loyal or harder working. I learned something profound during those 2 months between being called replaceable and watching my boss get replaced. Your value isn't determined by the loudest voice in the room. It's determined by the quality of your work, the strength of your character, and the positive impact you have on the people and projects around you. Richard had the loudest voice. But I had something more powerful: results, relationships, and respect earned through consistent excellence. In the end, those things matter more than any amount of posturing or position power. So if you're sitting in a meeting right now being told you're replaceable, being made to feel small by someone who should be building you up, take heart. Document your achievements. Keep doing excellent work. Build relationships with people who appreciate your value. And trust that organizations with good leadership will eventually recognize what you bring to the table. It might take 2 months like it did for me. It might take longer. But if you're truly good at what you do, if you conduct yourself with integrity, if you focus on making meaningful contributions rather than playing political games, your day will come. And when it does, when you're sitting in the office that once belonged to the person who underestimated you, you'll understand that being called replaceable was never really about you. It was about someone else's insecurity, someone else's fear, someone else's failure to understand what real leadership looks like. My name is Marcus Chin. I was told I was replaceable. 2 months later, I replaced the person who said it. But more importantly, I learned that the only opinion of me that really matters is my own, and the only measure of success that counts is whether I can look myself in the mirror and be proud of the work I do and the person I'm becoming. Richard is gone. But the lessons he taught me, unintentionally, remain. And every day when I walk into this office, when I lead my team, when I make decisions about how to treat people and how to build a culture, I remember what it felt like to be on the other side of that dynamic. I remember the humiliation, the frustration, the determination to prove my worth. And I use those memories to make sure that no one on my team ever has to go through what I went through. Because that's what real leaders do. They don't declare people replaceable. They make people irreplaceable by investing in them, believing in them, and giving them opportunities to shine. That's the leader Richard could never be. And that's the leader I work every day to become. The story could end there with a neat moral about perseverance and justice. But life rarely offers such clean conclusions. There's more to tell because the aftermath of Richard's departure revealed complexities I hadn't anticipated. About 6 months after I took over as department head, I received a LinkedIn message from Richard. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, unsure if I wanted to engage. Eventually, curiosity won out. The message was surprisingly humble. He congratulated me on my promotion, acknowledged that he had handled our working relationship poorly, and said he had done a lot of reflecting since leaving Davidson Technologies. He didn't make excuses or try to justify his behavior. He simply said he was sorry for how he had treated me and hoped I was doing well. I read the message 3 times, trying to detect any hidden agenda or manipulation. But it seemed genuine. People can change, I suppose, or at least recognize their mistakes even if the change comes too late to repair the damage. I responded briefly, thanking him for reaching out and wishing him well in his future endeavors. I didn't offer forgiveness, but I didn't hold on to anger either. What would be the point? He was a cautionary tale now, a chapter in my story that had already been written and closed. That exchange made me think about the human element of all this. Richard wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a real person with his own insecurities, pressures, and failures. His behavior had hurt me and others, but it had also clearly hurt him in the long run. There's no satisfaction in watching someone self-destruct, even when they're the architect of their own downfall. But that doesn't mean his behavior was acceptable or that the consequences were undeserved. Leadership comes with responsibility, and one of those responsibilities is treating people with dignity regardless of whether they challenge you or make you uncomfortable. Richard failed at that fundamental task and he paid the price for it. Meanwhile, my career continued to evolve. The Henderson Industries project expanded beyond anything we initially imagined. We became their trusted technology partner, working on strategic initiatives that shaped their entire digital transformation. The relationship I built with their CIO, Janet Morrison, became one of the most rewarding professional partnerships of my career. Janet actually asked me once about the proposal that had won her company's business. We were having dinner after a successful project milestone, and she said something that struck me. "You know what made your proposal different?" she asked. "It was the only one that felt like you had actually tried to understand our business. Everyone else just pitched their standard services with our company name plugged in. You showed us you had done your homework, that you cared about our success, not just making a sale." I thought about Richard's generic proposal, the one he had been so confident would win the day. He had been so focused on showcasing our capabilities that he never stopped to think about what the client actually needed. It was emblematic of his entire approach to leadership. It was about him, not about the people he was supposed to serve. That conversation with Janet reinforced something I had learned through the whole experience. Success isn't about being the smartest person in the room or having the most authority. It's about genuinely caring about the outcome and being willing to put in the work to achieve it. It's about listening more than you talk, understanding before you act, and putting the mission above your ego. These sound like simple principles, but they're surprisingly rare in practice. I've met many people throughout my career who talked about collaboration and empowerment but practiced control and self-promotion. Richard was just one example of a common phenomenon. Leaders who rise to positions of authority but lack the emotional intelligence and humility to lead effectively. The good news is that organizations are getting better at recognizing this. Patricia's willingness to make a change, even though it was difficult and disruptive, showed that Davidson Technologies valued substance over status, results over rhetoric. Not every company has leadership with that kind of courage and integrity. As I built my own leadership style, I made a conscious effort to be transparent about my own journey. When I onboard new team members, I often shared parts of my story, including the challenges I faced with Richard. Not to badmouth him or seek sympathy, but to establish a culture where it was okay to talk about difficulty, conflict, and growth. Leadership isn't about being perfect, I would tell my team. It's about being genuine, being committed to the mission, and being willing to learn from your mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes and I'll make more. But I promise you this, I will always treat you with respect, I will always fight for your success, and I will always create space for you to speak up when you see something that needs to change. That openness created a different kind of team dynamic. People weren't afraid to bring problems to me. They knew that disagreement wasn't disloyalty, that questions weren't challenges to my authority. We had vigorous debates about the best approaches to problems, and those debates made us stronger, not weaker. There were times when I caught myself falling into old patterns, times when I felt defensive or threatened by someone's pushback. In those moments, I would pause and ask myself, am I about to become Richard right now? That simple question was usually enough to reset my perspective and respond more constructively. I also made it a priority to advocate for others the way Patricia had advocated for me. When I saw talented people being overlooked or undervalued in other departments, I spoke up. When junior team members did exceptional work, I made sure leadership knew about it. When people had ideas that challenged the status quo, I helped them refine and present those ideas rather than shutting them down. This approach created a ripple effect. The people I mentored went on to lead their own teams with similar values. The culture we built in our department became a model for other parts of the organization. Several people who had been planning to leave the company decided to stay because they saw the change happening and wanted to be part of it. Patricia noticed this too. In my annual review, she said something that meant more to me than any promotion or raise. You haven't just performed well in your role, Marcus. You've changed the culture of this organization for the better. That's the mark of a true leader. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Leading a team is hard even when you have good intentions and sound principles. There were projects that failed despite our best efforts. There were personnel issues that required difficult conversations. There were times when I had to make unpopular decisions for the good of the team or the company. The difference was that I tried to handle these challenges with transparency and empathy. When a project failed, we did a thorough postmortem to understand what went wrong and what we could learn, without pointing fingers or assigning blame. When I had to have difficult conversations with team members about performance issues, I approached them as coaching opportunities rather than confrontations. When I made unpopular decisions, I explained the reasoning behind them and acknowledged the concerns people raised. Not everyone was happy all the time. That's impossible. But people felt heard, valued, and treated fairly. And that made all the difference. One particular situation tested my leadership in a way I hadn't anticipated. About a year into my role as department head, I hired a new senior analyst named David. He came highly recommended, with impressive credentials and strong technical skills. In his first few months, he did excellent work and seemed to fit well with the team. But gradually, I started noticing a pattern. David would dismiss ideas from junior team members. He would take credit for collaborative work. He would speak over people in meetings and interrupt them with a condescending tone. His behavior reminded me uncomfortably of Richard. Several team members came to me privately with concerns about David. They felt intimidated by him. They didn't want to work on projects with him. The situation was affecting team morale. I knew I had to address it, but I also felt conflicted. David was technically excellent, and we had important projects that benefited from his expertise. It would be disruptive to lose him. Part of me wanted to look the other way, to tell myself it wasn't that bad, that people needed to toughen up. But then I thought about how I had felt working under Richard. I thought about the promise I had made to myself about the kind of leader I would be. And I knew what I had to do. I had a direct conversation with David about the feedback I was receiving. I was specific about the behaviors that were problematic and the impact they were having on the team. I expected defensiveness, maybe even hostility. Instead, David seemed genuinely surprised. "I had no idea people felt that way," he said. "I'm not trying to be dismissive or condescending. I'm just trying to be efficient and get things done." We had a longer conversation about the difference between confidence and arrogance, between being decisive and being domineering. I shared some of my own story, including my experience with Richard. I explained that technical excellence alone wasn't enough if it came at the cost of team cohesion and morale. To David's credit, he took the feedback seriously. He worked on changing his approach, actively seeking input from junior team members and acknowledging their contributions. It wasn't a perfect transformation and there were setbacks, but he made genuine effort to improve. About 6 months later, David came to me and said something that stuck with me: "Thank you for not just writing me off when you got that feedback. A lot of managers would have started the process of getting rid of me. You gave me a chance to grow, and that's made me a better professional and a better person." That conversation reminded me that leadership isn't just about dealing with clearly toxic people like Richard. It's also about helping good people become better, about investing in growth even when it would be easier to cut your losses. Not everyone deserves that investment, and not everyone will respond positively to it. But when someone does, the impact goes far beyond that individual. As I approach my 3rd year as department head, I find myself reflecting on how much has changed since that staff meeting where Richard declared me replaceable. The department has grown from 35 people to 52. Our revenue has more than doubled. We've won industry recognition for our work and our culture. Our employee retention rate is among the highest in the company. But the numbers, as satisfying as they are, aren't what I'm most proud of. What matters more is the culture we've built, the people we've developed, the relationships we've forged with clients and with each other. It's the fact that people want to work here, that they feel valued and challenged in positive ways, that they're learning and growing and doing work that matters. Several people from my team have been promoted into leadership roles in other departments, taking the principles we've established and spreading them throughout the organization. That's the real legacy. Not just performing well in your own area, but creating ripples that make the entire organization better. I still think about Richard sometimes, especially when I face difficult leadership decisions. Not with anger or resentment, but as a reminder of what not to do, of how easily power can corrupt when it's not tempered by humility and genuine concern for others. I wonder if he's leading a team somewhere else now, and if so, whether he's changed his approach. I wonder if his experience at Davidson Technologies taught him anything, or if he's repeating the same patterns in a different context. I hope for his sake and for the sake of anyone working for him that he learned something. But I'll never know, and that's okay. My story doesn't need his redemption to be complete. It stands on its own. A story about perseverance, about integrity, about the difference between being declared replaceable and actually being replaceable. It's a story about how toxic leadership eventually exposes itself, and how organizations with good values will ultimately make the right choice, even if it takes time. Most importantly, it's a story about transformation. I'm not the same person who sat in that staff meeting 3 years ago, burning with humiliation and anger. I'm stronger, wiser, more confident in my own value. I've learned that respect has to be earned, not demanded. I've learned that true leadership is about service, not status. I've learned that the best way to prove someone wrong isn't to argue with them, but to simply be excellent at what you do. Richard tried to make me feel small. Instead, he inadvertently set in motion a series of events that helped me grow larger, not in ego but in capability, influence, and impact. For that, in a strange way, I'm grateful. So to anyone out there dealing with their own Richard, facing their own humiliating staff meeting, wondering if they should stay and fight or cut their losses and leave, I offer this. Trust yourself. Trust your abilities. Trust that excellence and integrity will eventually be recognized by people who matter. And if they're not recognized in your current organization, trust that there are other organizations out there that will appreciate what you bring to the table. There's no shame in leaving a toxic situation. But there's also something powerful about staying, about refusing to let someone else's dysfunction define your career, about transforming a negative experience into something positive. The choice is yours. Just remember, being called replaceable says more about the person saying it than it does about you. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming the leader you wished you had building the culture you wished you worked in, and proving through your actions that real leadership looks nothing like the caricature that tried to diminish you. My name is Marcus Chin. I was told I was replaceable. And I proved that while everyone is technically replaceable, some people are worth replacing, and others are worth building an entire organization around. The challenge is being the kind of person, and building the kind of culture, that recognizes the difference. That's what I try to do every day. And every time I walk past that conference room where Richard delivered his fateful pronouncement, I smile. Not because I won and he lost, but because that moment, as painful as it was, set me on a path to becoming the leader I always had the potential to be. Sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts, if we have the courage to transform them into something meaningful. And that, ultimately, is what leadership is all about.